Hello everyone, this is Jeff, and today I'm going to show you how to download and use Open Broadcaster Software, otherwise known as OBS. OBS is a software encoder and all around a really good production software, completely free, that you can use to live stream your own shows or even just record your own shows from your computer, from home, really anywhere that you have access to OBS, you can live stream and record some awesome stuff. Some examples of where you can live stream to include YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, Periscope, and many more. So first off, I think it's important to mention how to even obtain OBS. Simply type in OBS in your web browser. It should be the first link that pops up. It'll take you to this website and download for your platform. Today we are on Windows, but the interface and everything should be the same for any platform. Alright, now that you have OBS downloaded, installed, and open, we'll go ahead and go through the settings. There's a couple different ways that you can access the settings. The first way is by going to File and then Settings, or even easier is going to Controls and then clicking Settings down here. Within General Settings, we have some basic things like Language, Theme. You can change the theme to whatever you like. Output, Show Confirmation Dialog when starting streams is great because it'll give you a little prompt when you start the stream, so that way you don't accidentally start the stream without knowing it. And then Keep Recording when streams stops or automatically record when streaming. Those are great as well because I know I like to record my live streams locally as well, and a lot of times I have forgotten to hit start recording, so this is a great option, so that way when you start streaming it will just automatically record it as well. Source alignment and snapping. Once we start editing things in our canvas here, this is basically going to affect how things snap to each other. You can change the sensitivity to be higher or lower, or you can just disable it altogether. We're going to skip projectors, system tray, preview, importers, because those you probably don't need to mess with. Those are pretty special case type things. And then the studio mode, this is going to come in handy later. You can change the layout if you want. You can change if you want to show, preview, and program labels, and then different settings for the multi-view as well. Moving on to stream, this is really important if you're actually live streaming your show instead of just recording it. You can change which service you want to use up here. By default, OBS lists some of the more popular streaming platforms, but if you don't see the one that you want, you can go ahead and hit Show All, and it'll give you a long list of places you can stream to. You can also just hit Custom and then type in the information manually, or go to a custom site that maybe just isn't listed in OBS. I'll show you how to get the server and stream key later in a separate tutorial, but for now, we'll go ahead and move on to output. On output mode, we're going to switch it to simple since most of you probably won't need to adjust any of the advanced settings. Up here in streaming, we have our video bitrate. You can keep it between 3000, 3500, even 4000. Basically, this just affects how your data is being pushed out. So lower bit rates are going to push out less data and therefore a lower quality stream, and then higher bit rates are going to push out more data and higher quality streams. Just keep in mind that the higher you go with your bit rate, the more that it's going to affect your internet, and it may not be able to handle it. So I would recommend keeping it between 3,000 to 5,000, and you should be good to go. Down here in encoder, the software encoder is by default what OBS will set it to, and I recommend that you stick to that unless you have a lower performing computer that doesn't have a great CPU. You can change it to hardware. The only difference is that hardware is going to push out a lower quality stream than a software encoder will. So if I switch this to hardware, even at 3000 kilobits per second, I'm going to get a lower quality stream than I would with software at the same bit rate. So just keep that in mind. An audio bit rate, you can just leave it at 160, I believe even 128. I'm not an audio expert. From what I've heard, though, once you start going past 160, you kind of get diminishing returns. Most people won't really notice the up in quality, so I would just keep it where it's at. Down here in recording, a lot of this is self-explanatory. Choose your recording path wherever you want your video to record to, if that's your computer, a specific folder on your computer, or say an external hard drive. Recording quality, I would recommend keeping it same as stream. You can go all the way up to lossless quality, which means it's going to record your video as is, but keep in mind that the file sizes are going to be extremely large and you may not have enough storage. So I would just keep it as same as stream. And recording format, by default it's set to MOV, but you can change it to MP4 if you'd like, as well as some of these other file types. If you are on MP4 or MOV, OBS will warn you that if, let's say, your computer just shuts down, your power goes out, you don't have an uninterrupted power supply, and so as soon as the power goes out, your computer shuts down, it won't be able to save that recording. Whatever you had is all lost. In order to save the recording, you need to be able to stop the recording. If you are concerned about losing your data, you can switch to the MKV file type. This is what OBS recommends, and you can just convert the file to MP4 or MOV before editing. Now we move on to audio. Again, I wouldn't mess with the sample rate. Channels we'll keep at stereo, but you could put it to mono. Devices, this is basically where OBS is picking up audio from. It might either be disabled or set to default. I would recommend just keeping it at default, but if you do have a separate audio interface like I do, you can change it to that as well, just to make sure that it's picking up the right device. And if you're not seeing any audio down here in the audio mixer, it's most likely because you don't have this set up correctly, so just kind of go back here if you're not getting audio. Meters, don't need to worry about that. Monitoring device, you can monitor through Windows if you want. I would generally just recommend leaving this at default and leaving it alone. Moving on to hotkeys, you can basically just change the delay between when you push a mute button to when it actually mutes the mic if you want to delay that for some reason. Now we'll go to video. Base canvas resolution is what you're capturing. So if you're capturing in 1080p or 720, set it to the appropriate resolution. Most of the time it will be 1080, but you may also need to move down to 720 depending on what you're capturing. And then the output resolution is what you're pushing out to the internet. So we may be capturing at 1080p, but I only want to stream in 720p. Streaming at 720p is great because you can still have a great looking stream without having to push out as many pixels as 1080p. And then down to FPS values, this is your frames per second that you're streaming at. You can keep it at 30. You can also go up to 60 if you want, and then everything in between. Say if you're recording something for CMAC, you could set that to 29.97 or 59.94 accordingly. It's all up to you. Hotkeys are basically just buttons that you press and they do things. So if I want to start streaming, I can set this to numpad 1 and then also set stop streaming to numpad 1. So that way, whenever I hit that button, it'll start streaming or stop streaming. Now keep in mind that unless you change a certain setting in the advanced section, your hotkeys are always active when you have OBS open. So if I have OBS open like I do, and I go to another window and start typing stuff, let's say I use the calculator and I type in numpad number 1, it'll start streaming because OBS is open. You can change that setting to only be active when you're focused on OBS, and we'll get to that in a minute, but just keep that in mind, that if you don't change the setting, by default, these hotkeys are always active. So I recommend setting them to keys that you don't often use. And in my case, that is numpad number 1. Moving on to the advanced section, I recommend don't touch it. Just don't touch anything in this area except for the hotkeys. This is that setting that I was talking about earlier. You can set it to either never disable hotkeys when the main window is in focus or when it is not in focus. So if we want to set it to the hotkeys are only active when I'm in OBS, we would set it to disable hotkeys when main window is not in focus. So now we can move on to our panels down here. Scenes and sources. Basically, scenes are just collections of sources. You can use scenes to be different camera angles, essentially, and then the sources are like the graphics that are over that camera angle. So if I go to scenes, I'm going to add a scene. I'm going to just call it main. And now I need to add a source. This is where you would normally add your camera, and that would be a video capture device. But since I don't have anything connected right now, I'm just going to do display capture, and I'll just name it display capture and then copy or capture my second display. So now we have our main camera angle up and running, and I can do different things like adding a graphic if I wanted to under image. I could add a video on top of that by adding a media source, or I can just do something simple like add text. And on here, I'll just type in hello. And then I can edit the settings for the text right here, like change the color to say black, and then we'll hit OK. Within the canvas here, I can move the text around, I can change the size of it, and I can do that for the camera angle as well, as long as I have it selected. So how you would use scenes and sources is, as mentioned before, you can either use it as their different camera angles. You can also have different scenes, in which case I'll go here and I'll add an end scene. In this scene, I'm just going to add text, call it end. Ooh, ending. Spelled wrong. And then we'll just hit end. Boom. And now we have end. So now we have our main scene, our end scene. We'll even go to beginning, beginning, We'll go ahead and add a source with text. And begin. And begin. Cool. So now we have our scene set up. We have our beginning, main, and end. We can change the order just by dragging them, and then we would switch to them just by clicking. Within the sources menu, you can change the visibility of a source. So if we don't want this text to be visible, we just click the little eyeball and it's gone. And then we can also lock it so that way we can't move it. Now in the audio mixer, this is where we will change the volume of our audio. So if you have a microphone connected or you have music playing on your desktop, this is where you can change the volume and you have your different levels right here. You can also mute the audio by clicking this little speaker, and then you can go to advanced audio properties to change things like the balance, change it to mono. If you want to offset the audio, so if your video signal is coming in via HDMI, and so it's a little delayed, but your audio is in real time, you can offset your audio so that way it better matches your video. Scene transitions, this is basically how you transition to scenes. So by default, it's on fade. So when I go to beginning, it'll just fade to beginning, and it just fades to it. You can change this to, say, a cut, and now it'll just cut to different scenes. I can also add a stinger, and what that'll do is let you basically add a custom transition. So I can add my own video file with my own transition, and now whenever it's on stinger, it'll play that video. Right now, we'll keep it to fade. What's really cool is that you can set a transition override for each scene. So if you want a specific transition to play when you're changing to a scene, you can do that. What we'll do is in our scenes panel, we'll right click, we'll go to transition override, and then you can select which transition you want. So let's say every time I go to my main scene, I always want it to fade. So even if I set our transition to cut, I can go through our sources, and now whenever I go to main, it fades, but it'll cut to everything else because that's the default. Then we have controls. A lot of this is self-explanatory as well. Just start streaming, start recording. We have our settings, and then exit. Exit, we'll just close the program. And then we have studio mode. So if we click studio mode, we get something akin to like a TriCaster at CMAC. If you've used a TriCaster, you've taken the studio workshop, you'll be very familiar with the preview and program concept. Basically, program is what people are seeing. This is what we're sending out to the internet, and then preview, only you can see. It is a preview, as it says. So if I click on beginning, now what we can do is we can hit transition, and it'll move between them. We also have quick transitions right here if we want a specific one that we want to use. So let's say we want to fade. We can just fade between them like that. You can change which transition is showing up by clicking this little arrow, and you have your list right there. And you also have your little slider here to go between just like that. One neat thing as well is, let's say you're ending a stream. Let's say we're on our end graphic right here and we want to fade to black. You can just click fade to black, and it fades to black. What a concept. So what's really cool about studio mode is that you can also edit a scene, and it won't actually show the edit until you transition to it. So let's bring up our main, and then I'll also go ahead and just cut to our main and then select it again. So now we have main in both preview and program, but let's say I want to take away this hello text. I can just go ahead and hide it. Now on program, it's still showing up, but when I hit fade and transition to it, it goes away. So this can be really useful for lower thirds. If you want to say, let's say this text is a lower third, we want to show it on the bottom there. We can transition fade to bring it up for a few seconds, and then we want to take it away. We'll hide it and then fade again, and it goes away. And you can just do that for all of your lower thirds. Another neat thing to go along with studio mode is a built-in multi-viewer. We just need to go up to view. We can either full screen the multi-viewer in one of our monitors, or we'll just pull it up in windowed mode. And now you have a multi-viewer that shows all of your different scenes. What you can also do is click on a scene that you want, and it'll put it in preview. There are options within OBS to also double click, and then it'll change it to program. So if I wanted to go to beginning and I wanted to change that to our program, I can double click it and it'll switch over. Don't have that set up right now, but it is an option for you if you want to use the multi-viewer as your main interface. The last thing that I want to show you is profiles and scene collection. Profiles are great if you have different accounts that you're streaming to, different people using the same computer. You can set different profiles for each person. Profiles basically just change the settings. So if I want to go to new, and I'll call this tutorial. Now if I go into my settings, we can go ahead and change the stream key. We can change our hotkeys. So let's say I want studio mode to be the tilde key. Go to apply. And now I go back to the profile that I was using before. We go to settings, and we'll see within hotkeys that hotkey is not there because it's assigned to the profile. So now we also have scene collection. Scene collection just changes our collection of scenes. So if I want to go to untitled, this is the scene collection that I've been using for a long time that just has all of my personal scenes on it. We have the ones for the podcast, for instance, right here. You can kind of see how I have things set up. For the podcast, for instance, I have our starting screen with our video playing. This is just a graphic to be like, hey, we're live, and then this will play to give people some time to join the live stream before the actual show starts. I can go down here to a waiting screen. You see that custom transition right there. A waiting screen like this is, say we're having technical difficulties, we need to pause the content, but we don't want to stop the live stream itself. We can go ahead and just play this. We have our main scene right here. Under this scene, we would have a camera down here and a camera up here for two different guests. And then we have our end screen. The end screen is just a nice kind of cap to the live stream. You have a beginning, you have your main, and then you have your end. So it's just better than cutting the stream right there when you're done. And there you go. There's your walkthrough of OBS. I hope some of you found this helpful. I hope you were able to gain some knowledge from this and get some ideas of how you can create your own show from home, your own live stream. OBS is a powerful production tool that's completely free, and I definitely recommend that you poke around and see what you can do, because you can definitely do a lot more than what I showed today. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you have a good day. That's going to be it for me, and this is the end.